Okay, my unit is Developmental Psychology. Developmental psychology is a scientific study of how and why humans develop over the course of their life. The first step of developmental psychology would be prenatal development. First, there's the zygote, the fertilized egg that undergoes rapid cell division and then forms into an embryo. This takes place from conception to 2 weeks. Next is the embryo, the developing human organism. This takes place from 2 to 8 weeks. Then there's the fetus, the developing human organism, but this one takes place from 9 weeks to birth. Finally, you have birth. Certain chemicals or agents called teratogens can cause harm if ingested or contracted by the mother. The placenta can filter out many potentially harmful substances, but teratogens pass through this barrier and can affect the fetus in profound ways. One of the most common teratogens is alcohol. Even small amounts of alcohol can change the way the fetal brain develops. Children with alcoholic mothers who drink heavily during pregnancy are at high risk for fetal alcohol syndrome, or FAS. Children born with FAS have small, malformed skulls and mental retardation. Researchers are also investigating a less severe effect of moderate drinking during pregnancy called fetal alcohol effect. These children typically do not show all the symptoms of FAS, but may have specific developmental problems later in life, such as learning disabilities or behavioral problems. An important thing to know when studying developmental psychology is the attachment theory. Biologist Konrad Lorenz said that some infant animals, such as geese, attach or imprint on individuals or even objects at a critical period after birth. Harry Harlow did a test where he raised 2 baby monkeys and provided them with a terry cloth mother and a wireframe mother. To his surprise, the monkeys chose the terry cloth mother over the wireframe mother, even when the wireframe mother was the one with food. Another important person to know when studying the attachment theory is Mary Ainsworth. She studied attachment by placing infants into novel situations. Her experiment involved a parent and child coming into a room and then the parent leaving the child in the room for a short amount of time. She found that there was 3 broad or general reactions. The first is called secure attachments. Approximately 66% of children had this reaction. They confidently explored while the parents were present, but were distressed when their parents left. They ended up coming back to their parents when they returned. The next one is avoidant attachments. Approximately 21% of children had this reaction. They were eager to explore, and they did not go back to their parents when they came back. The next one is resistant attachments, and only 12% of children experienced this reaction. They had extreme stress when the parents left, but they resisted comfort when the parents came back also. Parenting styles are extremely important when talking about a child's development. The first parenting style is permissive. This parenting style does not set clear guidelines for their children and often leads to emotional problems and dependency later in the child's life. Next is authoritative parents. They have set, consistent standards, but the standards are reasonable and explained. This leads to the most healthy home environment, and this is the ideal parenting style that you would want to have. Next is authoritarian parents. They set strict standards for their behavior and apply punishment for violations of the rules. So these are the most strict parents. Authoritative is in the middle, and permissive, those are the parents that just don't really care. Okay, next for developmental psychology are the stage theories. And the argument in this is continuity or discontinuous. So continuity, do we develop continuously or discontinuous? Do we have some periods of rapid development and some of little change? Well, Sigmund Freud has the psychosexual stages. There's 5 of them. First is oral. Infants seek pleasure through their mouths. This is birth to 1 year. Then there's the anal stage. This involves bowel control and potty training, and this is from 1.5 to 3 years old. Next is the phallic stage. Babies realize gender, and they can cause conflict in between the family. There's the Oedipus and Electra complex, which is for the Oedipus is for the boy and the Electra is for the girl. This is 3 to 6 years old. Then there's a latency stage, and this is a calm stage. It takes place from about 6 years old to puberty. The sexual drives are sublimated, and the main focus during this stage is school. Next and last is genital stage. This is during adolescence, and you have a major interest on sexual activity, and this takes place from puberty and older. Next up for stage theories is Erik Erikson. He has the psychosocial stages, and there's 8 of these. First up is trust versus mistrust. Babies learn whether or not they can trust that the world provides for their needs. This stage takes place from birth to 1 year old. Next is autonomy versus shame and doubt. Toddlers learn to exert their will over their own bodies. This is from 1 to 3 years old. It's common during this stage that they will say the words no. Next up is initiative versus guilt. Children become curious and ask many questions. This occurs from 3 to 6 years old. Industry versus inferiority. This is the beginning of formal education, and you end up becoming competitive with your peers. This takes place from 6 years old to adolescence. Next is identity versus role confusion. This is where you try out various roles and groups to find yourself and to see where you fit in. This stage occurs from adolescent years to your early 20s. Next is intimacy versus isolation. And the question with this is, how much time should we spend with ourselves or with our family? Because both spending time with ourselves and with our family are both important. This occurs from 20 years to 40 years. Next is generativity versus stagnation. During this stage, we look at our life path and make sure things are going how we want them to go. We decide if we are giving something back, are we generating things, or are we just stagnating and sitting around? This occurs from 40 to 60 years. The next and final stage is integrity versus despair. This occurs towards the end of life. We look back and see if we are happy, and we decide if we have a life of meaningfulness versus lost opportunity. This occurs from 60 years onward. Next, we'll be talking about cognitive and moral development. Cognitive development, Jean Piaget. There's 4 stages. The first stage is sensory motor, and this takes place from birth to 2 years. Babies experience and explore the world through their senses. One thing that they cannot comprehend at this stage is object permanence. They think that just because they can't see something in their sensory range, that it does not exist. Next stage is preoperational, which takes place from 2 to 7 years. The baby starts speaking and representing the world through language. During this stage, they're very egocentric and they can't see the world through anybody else's perspective but their own. Next stage is concrete operations. This takes place from 8 to 12 years. Children think more logically about complex relationships during this stage, and also they learn object permanence. Next stage, formal operations. This takes place from 12 years old to adult. They start thinking abstractly and start thinking with adult reasoning. They learn to manipulate objects or ideas in their mind that they can't physically see. Next is moral development, which is largely studied by Lawrence Kohlberg. Moral development has 3 levels. It's based off of the Heinz dilemma, in which Heinz must make a choice to steal a drug that he cannot afford in order to save his wife's life. The first stage is pre-conventional. Decision most likely to avoid punishment. Reasoning is limited to how the choice affects themselves. Children in the pre-conventional level might say that Heinz should not steal the drug because he might get caught and put into prison. The next stage is conventional. Moral choice through others' eyes. You make this choice on how others will view you. Children in the conventional level might say that Heinz should steal the drug because then he could save his wife and people would think of him as a hero. The next stage is post-conventional, which examines rights and values of the choice, and you make your decision based off of the rights and values. Children in the post-conventional stage might say that Heinz should steal the drug because his wife's right to life outweighs the store owner's right to personal property. Okay, I'd like to show this chart really quickly. It's in my psychology review book. I'll be putting this in the outline because it's really good. It breaks down all the stages because they can be a little confusing. So this is a really good way to compare all of them out at the same time. Alright, lastly, we'll be talking about gender and development. Different cultures encourage different gender roles. There are three main theories that try to explain how gender roles develop. The first is the biopsychological theory. It concentrates on the nature part of nature versus nurture. One main discovery that came out of this theory is that women have larger corpus callosums than men. The next theory is the psychodynamic theory. Freud viewed gender development as a competition and backed this up with his examples of the Oedipus and Electra complex. Children realize they can't win against their mom or dad and then end up learning their gender role. The last theory is social cognitive theory. Effects of society on our thoughts about gender and how they influence development. This also helps us to develop a gender schema.